We just heard in the Jeff Zeleny live shot, the rotors of the Marine One leave the White House, and they're already here at Andrews. It is President Trump, Prime Minister Abe of Japan, and Melania will be joining them, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's what we're told. We're told that she came to Washington to go to Joint Base Andrews to get on the helicopter and get on the plane to go to Mar-a-Lago for the weekend. So we do expect to see her along with the leader of Japan, who we obviously saw earlier today give a rather unusual press conference with the new president in the White House.
As we stay on the pictures, we'll see him hop out of Marine One in just a second here. You know, he's had a very busy 3 weeks. And he also had, of course, with this meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister today. Next, I think it's Monday, the Trudeau from Canada, and then a couple days later, Netanyahu from Israel.
That's right. He is starting to get acquainted with his counterparts around the world, which is incredibly, incredibly important. And, David Gregory was on earlier, and he and I covered the Bush White House together, and we were kind of laughing in the halls here about the fact that we haven't seen such warmth between a U.S. president and a Japanese leader since back in the Bush years, when he used to constantly talk about the fact that their fathers fought each other during World War II, and look at where the countries are now. I mean, it wasn't that kind of personal connection today, but clearly you saw President Trump try to reach out in every way, shape, or form to try to continue the good relationship with Japan, which I think shouldn't be noteworthy in any normal circumstance, but against the backdrop of a very tense conversation with another very deep-seated ally, Australia, and the contentious relationship that he's had with another long-standing ally, Mexico, it is noteworthy that things seem to be okay. I mean, we might find out that there was some tense conversation, but there are some back and forth about U.S. troops in Japan that have remained there since World War II and so forth. But for the most part, at least in public, it seemed to be all systems go, which again is noteworthy considering we can't rely on that with this president based on the first 3 weeks.
Dana, thank you. We're going to stay on these pictures, though. I know a lot of people love to see Marine One and, of course, Air Force One, and watching also, really, this is the First Lady's first test. This is Melania going to the Winter White House with the Prime Minister and his wife. So we'll stay on the pictures, but let me move along. An EU leader announcing just a short time ago that the U.S. is committed to the quote-unquote full implementation of the Iran nuclear deal. So just think about that, especially given the context, the president slamming the deal repeatedly as he was candidate Trump first and as recent as a week ago.
The nuclear deal is a disaster. This is going to lead to nuclear proliferation all over. That horrible, disgusting, absolutely incompetent deal with Iran, where they get $150 billion. Look at the deal with Iran. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. They can do whatever they want to do, because I know many of the people involved in the negotiation. The Iranians are very good negotiators. The Persians are always great negotiators. They are laughing at us back in Iran.
That is not the only policy switch we have heard coming from the White House. The president, as Dana and I were just discussing, now vowing to honor the one China policy, acknowledging Taiwan is part of China, something Trump had challenged in recent months. Remember, one of his first phone calls was to Taiwan. So let me bring in Tom Countryman, former Undersecretary for Arms Control at the State Department. As Tom, just bear with me. We're going to stay on some of these pictures of Marine One as well. We're waiting and watching for the president and the Japanese prime minister. But Tom, welcome back.
Thanks very much. It's an honor to be here again.
Thank you. On Iran and the nuclear deal and China and acknowledging one China, you know, what's happening? Because this is such a reverse from what we heard from the president and also candidate. What's happening, and how much of this do you think is Rex Tillerson pulling some of the political strings?
Well, what we can hope is that in fact reflects something we've been waiting for months, a change from the loose cannon campaign mode to the responsible leadership role that any president has to embrace. I'm particularly hopeful that the reports are accurate and that U.S. officials have reassured our allies in Europe and elsewhere that we will stick by the JCPOA, by the Iran deal, because it's a deal that's being implemented and that continues to prevent Iran from further progress on a nuclear weapon. It's one thing to confront Iran, but if you're going to confront Iran and all of your most important friends of the world at the same moment, you're setting yourself up for a losing hand. Whether this is Secretary Tillerson, I don't have inside information on that. I want to hope so. As I've said before, it's important that this administration pursue a foreign policy that is informed by experience and by the practical guidance of professionals. We don't want to see the kind of amateur foreign policy that we've already had examples of.
Tom, what about as I'm looking at the Prime Minister and his wife and the President and his wife boarding Air Force One down from Mar-a-Lago? We know golf is on the table for the two men. Talking of diplomacy, and many presidents, right, are known for playing golf with world leaders. You could call it golf course diplomacy. How effective do you think that is in general?
Well, it's always important for leaders to form a personal connection and a connection of trust between themselves and other world leaders. And I hope that the president is successful in doing that. But golf still remains secondary in the process of building trust to saying what you're going to do and then being consistent in following through on that. And I think that the actions that this administration takes will have a lot more with that building of confidence than 18 holes of golf.
Tom Countryman, a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's also circle back to what we just heard from President Trump on his travel ban. With me now, former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, who's now president of the Senate Conservatives Fund. Ken Cuccinelli, good to see you again. How are you, sir?
Good to see you. I'm doing fine.
Let's just begin with, President Trump. We saw him at that joint news conference in the East Room just a little while ago. The news that he made, that he says he will, take new steps next week to keep the country safe. Might that mean rewriting an executive order? We still don't know yet. But do you think that would be a good idea?
Oh, I think it would be a brilliant idea. I think that they've already conceded a while ago that the rollout of this particular executive order was a little rough, and the courts have made it rougher still. But one thing that they have now is a ruling from the appellate court of the Ninth Circuit, the toughest circuit for this administration, and it will continue to be so. But it breaks out categories of individuals, some of whom, actually all of whom, are not American citizens. They may be lawfully present. There were those who were not lawfully present, etc., all of whom were discussed and addressed by the court. They can write an executive order to deal with each one of those classifications, as the underlying statute gives the president the power to do. And several of those more discrete executive orders will be completely bulletproof from court review at all, in one instance, and also it puts them in a position much stronger from a legal standpoint to win all across the board when the inevitable legal challenges do come.
So I'm hearing you correctly. So you would go category to category,
Yes.
Separating these and in pieces,
Right.
perhaps better argue to make it your word.
Well, and
bulletproof.
let's use, that's exactly right, and let's describe the biggest single category.
Please do.
It's people in these 7 countries who have never had a visa and have never been to this country. That, of course, is 99.99% of all the people covered by the executive order that's being litigated right now, and contains, presumably, the people the president is most concerned about, most legitimately concerned about, and they have absolutely no constitutional rights or rights to court review of anything the president does to block them from coming in the country. It is the other people, the people who've had a visa and worked at the University of Washington, for instance, their family members that you heard mentioned by Attorney General Ferguson of Washington. It is those folks that are the hook for litigation. So carve them out, treat them separately, and you'll get 99.9% of the national security protection the president wants with no court review. And then they can fight the battle on all the other pieces.
I understand, but let me just ask you this. I had Peter Bergen on,
Sure.
Yesterday, national security analyst and, renowned author, and he wrote this piece for CNN.com essentially saying when you look at, that list of, I want to say it was 78, terror attacks that the White House alleged that we, the media, didn't cover wrong. And he was saying that it's actually something like 9%. When you look at the countries that Trump wants to ban from coming to the U.S., it represents just a teeny tiny piece of the 78. They point out Brussels, Belgium attacks, France, and of course that's not going to be on the list. But how is that fair?
Well, it doesn't really matter whether it's fair or not. Under the Constitution, the president doesn't have to be fair. That sounds odd to Americans, but remember, we're not talking about Americans. We're talking about whether or not we're going to let non-Americans into this country. And so
ultimately, it is about American safety.
Well, absolutely. It's a national security issue. So let me share with you what I think is the strongest pillar that President Trump is standing on, and that is his reliance on President Obama's determination and Congress's determination that these 7 nations in particular are unusual problem spots as sources of terrorism and the threat of terrorism. That was not President Trump's discretion. He relied on their judgment. And so this attack that you've seen made on the president, this is a Muslim ban, this is just him shooting from the hip, he borrowed the analysis of the Congress and the last president. I think it makes his fundamental position nearly bulletproof, particularly given the extraordinary deposit of authority under the Constitution and the law with the president of national security issues. The courts hardly ever invade them in the manner that you've seen happen here in the Ninth Circuit.
I understand. You're absolutely right about those 7 countries identified by the Obama administration. I guess the stark difference is the previous administration didn't ban those people from those countries.
Right.